Well, I'm Carol Taylor, and I work for Rhapsody, which is a streaming music service. And I was going to take a little informal poll here. Who uses some kind of streaming music service? Rhapsody, Spotify? A lot of people. Okay, good. So you understand what the concept is. I describe it as kind of like Netflix for music, like renting your music. So this helps as a context. So I'm going to talk a little bit through our approach to cross-platform design. So we have a service that is offered on a lot of different screens. You can get it on your mobile phone, iPhone or Android. You can get it on an iPad, an Android tablet, a TV, an Xbox, your PC, or a web browser. So a lot of different screens, a lot of different form factors, same sort of functionality, but offered in different contexts. So I'm going to take you through that and kind of how our approach to it. So I promise I'm not going to go into the entire history of music listening, but for music, I think it's really important to have some context around how people listen to music, because it's a very personal thing that people do, and it's very much embedded in their lifestyle. So one of the things we did to kind of understand the context is we did a literature review, and kind of a historical review of how people interact with music. So, music has gone from being something you hear in person, in the presence of somebody else on their, in a concert hall or on their porch or somewhere, to something completely different. So, originally music, you really only heard the music that you could physically travel to and hear. So you could be co-located with whoever was performing. That evolved over time into analog and eventually digital reproduction. So, with the evolution of music has come a lot of changes in the way people listen. The Sony Walkman being kind of a big breakthrough in the way listening happens. And then, as things have continued to evolve into sort of a digital distribution model, we've gone from, evolving from physical media like a record or a CD to a digital environment like iTunes or Napster or Rhapsody, where music is kind of in the cloud. It's not really a physical thing, so we've kind of been removed from our artifacts of the physical manifestation of music. So I have another talk about kind of the research that we did. We did ethnographic research around music listening in the home and in the car to get a better understanding. But just to understand kind of the context of music, I think it's important to get a little bit of history. So there's a lot of different ways to listen to music. It just keeps getting more and more additive. So it's not necessarily one replacing another. People are adding things to their music listening. And it's really interesting when we look at people, how they listen to music, they really pull together a lot of different pieces and ways of listening to music. It's not one way. They have something in their car, they have something at their desk, they have something when they're in transit. So they kind of articulate all these pieces together. The other thing that's really changed a lot is the amount of music. So people who have Spotify, Rhapsody, you have access to 15 million pieces of music. That's very different than even 20 years ago when you had a record collection that you could fit in your closet or on your shelf or wherever you could fit it. It's really changed the whole way that people think about and consume music. And it's no longer necessarily physical. It's also no longer necessarily in a group setting. It's become very individual. The white earbuds with iTunes are kind of a representation of personal listening. And so things have changed quite a bit in a lot of different ways that people can listen. People listen through their TVs, through their stereos, through their phones. And really, music, it's a lifestyle product. So context matters a lot. How I listen to music, what I listen to, the context makes a big difference, what those choices are and kind of how I interact with that device and that service. I mentioned it being not just duplicative, it's additive. So people are now, they still go see live music, they still, hear music that other people perform, but now they may be watching TV and listening to music, working on the computer and listening to music. They may combine a whole bunch of different things. They may still have vinyl records. They also may still have, a whole iTunes collection of a la carte songs. So one of the things that's changed is the idea of listening to a single song instead of an album, a piece of music, and the idea of shuffling. The notion of shuffling music didn't really exist before we had something like an MP3 player with shuffle. So the idea of letting something random kind of shuffle the deck, that's a new a new phenomena, relatively. So for digital music, there's a lot of specific considerations for music. If people ask about, cross-platform design and about different platforms, there's definitely platform considerations for Android and iTunes and so on, but there's also music-specific considerations when we think about what part of the service should we expose. What things do we want to do across all the screens, regardless of if I'm walking down the street or I'm sitting on my couch. This is a big question we grapple with a lot. How can I find new music? What do I find? What do I listen to next when I have 15 million songs? It's kind of a dilemma. It's a bit of work. It's kind of a little bit of a cognitive load. I have to really think about it. Am I listening for myself or in a social context? And a lot of listening is solo. And we found that from our ethnographic research. The vast majority of music listening is people listening by themselves. Do I want others to know what I'm listening to? So in the context of social sharing, am I fine to have people seeing on Facebook everything I'm listening to? I might be listening to some guilty pleasure, and I really, I may not want everybody to know I'm listening to ABBA or something, So, how much do I want other people to see what I'm listening to? How important is the quality of the sound? At a service like Rhapsody or Mog, people are sometimes attracted to this service are kind of audiophiles, so the quality of that sound can make a difference for some contexts for some people. How long will I be listening for? Is this just a quick snack on the bus? Or am I planning a party? Do I want to have hours of music? And then am I plugged in? This is a big one for us. Is my connectivity dedicated? If I'm at my computer at home or my connected TV, I'm pretty much guaranteed I have connectivity. If I'm walking around with my phone, it comes and goes. So there's whole issues around connectivity and downloading music and letting people kind of have temporary access to downloaded files. So lots of things to think about with context. So this is a definition of cross-platform design, I think from a Kai paper. But it's really, the notion of cross-platform design is ensuring that users can seamlessly move between interfaces and continue to accomplish their task or enjoy the service, even when they're dramatically different interfaces and display units. So how do you make that feel seamless and kind of gracefully take people from one thing to another? And consistency allows people to leverage their knowledge. You don't have to learn something brand new. I don't have to learn a completely different service on a different platform, even though the conventions may be really different. So that's kind of the trick, kind of our challenge. So we have this notion at Rhapsody of kind of lean forward and lean back by context. So depending on what I'm doing, I might be more or less engaged with the service. I get home at the end of the day, I might be tired, I might just want to turn on the radio and just hear music. I might want to lean back. Other times I might want to lean forward. Maybe it's a day that new releases come out on Tuesdays, and I'm very interested in what's new. I want to dig in, put some effort in, invest in finding new music to listen to or add to my collection. So this is just kind of a graphical way of depicting that, and we're kind of refining this as we do research and learn more about how people use this. We actually are finding that people are really more willing to do browsing on the tablet than we expected. So, we kind of went into the tablet with the idea that it was less than on a PC. But, this is just sort of an interesting way about thinking about engagement, because it really helps make a difference as to what features you decide to surface for the service in different contexts. Just because, I can do a lot of things on a mobile phone, these days with a nice touchscreen interface, doesn't mean I want to or I'm going to. I'm not necessarily going to do all the same things I'm going to do on, say, a tablet. So mobile phones. So mobile phones are a big one for us. So we're on both of the iPhones, multiple Android devices. We're on Windows Phone, and we're on BlackBerry, sort of. We have an older BlackBerry client. So the thing about mobile phones, and we're learning more about this as we do more research, is that it's really highly personal. It's the one device that you're not likely to have anybody else necessarily in your family. Maybe if you have kids, they'll play with it a little bit. But it's the one device where you're going to use it by yourself and is for your personal listening. And you tend to have partial attention span. You're kind of using it in short bursts. You have relatively limited input control depending on the device, but the touchscreens are getting much easier. It's much easier. I can do almost anything in terms of input on my phone that I can do on a tablet. Screens are smaller, although this new Note that just came out is pretty big. We call it the phablet. It's about it's almost 6 inches or so, and it's kind of a phone. It's kind of a tablet. So the sizes are varied, smaller than, say, a tablet, but changing. In varied orientation, you have the landscape and portrait for most devices, and intermittent connection and limited battery. These are the big constraints of mobile. I don't always have an internet connection, so I have to be smart about kind of managing the music that I have. And battery's getting better, but battery's a big concern, especially on some of the Android devices. These devices, if you are streaming high-quality audio or downloading a lot of music files for local playback, you can drain battery quickly. So people are kind of very conscious about managing battery life and connectivity. We have the ability to download music as long as you play it back through our service, so you can download a bunch of music locally. So people make sort of conscious decisions about, how much time do I have connectivity before I go through that tunnel, and what can I download in that amount of time so that I can listen to, have my favorite playlist to listen to on the way home or when I'm getting on an airplane. And then people listen mostly through headphones. There are car. I don't talk too much about car in here, but we do have a car version of some of our devices, and the car is like a speaker. But for the most part, people are listening via headphones on their mobile device. So Android platform, this is an example from a version of our Android product. It's all touchscreen optimized. There's this drawer navigation that's becoming kind of a new standard on Android. It lets you kind of open a menu from any place within the application. We have this notion of scrolling tabs that's becoming a new Android standard. The trick with Android is that the design standards are variable by Android release. Every time there's a new release, there are new standards. Unlike Apple, Android didn't come out of the gate with really strong, strict standards. It's been kind of an ongoing evolution. So we've got devices that support all different kinds of interactions over time, and we don't go all the way back. We have to go back 2 or 3 versions to support those. And then the sizing, so when you actually get into the kind of brass tacks of actually creating an interface for these Android devices, there's a lot of variability to the screen size. There's really there are 4 different resolutions, multiple sizes, a lot of new VGA devices, but the permutations are big. So if you're doing graphic production for these, there's a lot of complexity into how you design for this, optimize the display, and chop things up. Things that look great on big screens are really squished on small screens. So some of my UX team have the big, beautiful Samsung Galaxy screens, and I always make everybody look at everything on small, older devices, because you can really get sort of lulled into the sense that everything's a big, beautiful canvas to work on. So the production is challenging for Android, and iPhone's a little bit simpler. But we've done some things between our Android and iPhone applications to make them feel similar. We're using similar naming, similar colors. Again, it's touchscreen optimized. iPhone has these tab navigations along the bottom. That's really a hallmark of iPhone. Some people are starting to break out of that, but it's hard to make an iPhone app that feels like an iPhone app without including these tabs along the bottom. So that's kind of an important iPhone platform consideration. And then they have a soft back button at the top. Everything goes back. It's a stack. So that's kind of specific to iPhone. The human factors guidelines are very strong. There was a talk that was just given about iPhone development, and there's a lot of great information in there, and it's somewhat specific. It's still a lot of, there's a lot of open questions for interpretation, like leave lots of white space, things like that. So there's a lot of interpretation, but there are some very specific things around controls and use of navigation and stacking of the navigation. And then, in terms of the production, even though, tablet is big and beautiful for the phone, there's really just a couple of variations. And the math works out nicely, so things are just twice as big. So if you design it for an iPhone regular, as long as you give high-resolution assets, you can have an iPhone, high-resolution version of the iPhone, and things basically fit nicely. There's a little bit of a trick at the when you get to iPhone 5, you have a little more space at the bottom, but things are much simpler than on Android. Then Windows Phone is quite a bit different. So Windows Phone is the Metro design standard, and it has this pivot navigation. So everything is kind of pivoting back and forth through views of things. So you really can't have the same kind of general navigational architecture because it's very prescriptive. It's also very prescriptive in the recommendations for typography. You can do custom typography, but a lot of Windows apps have this same kind of look. They have large, headings and smaller type for listing. So there are a lot of sort of prescriptive things around the Metro design standards. And I won't go into this, but all three of these apps are subject to App Store requirements. So whenever we have a new app, we have to submit it to the Android Google Play Store, the iPhone Store, or the Windows Phone Store. And since we now have apps in market, it's easier to submit an update. If you have a new application, it's a little bit more complicated. So tablets, both iPad and Android, tablets are really more of an entertainment-oriented device and more of a shared device. They're visually rich and more tactical, and they invite exploration quite a bit. People tend to want to spend more time following information scent, I guess, or in this case it's music, kind of following a music path. And really, the orientation is really important. You do have to have landscape and portrait. In our case, we also have to support Google Play, AirPlay. So Apple AirPlay, which is a convention for running it on Apple TV. So we have to have controls for Apple TV. And it's still somewhat intermittent connection. I mean, most people are someplace where there's Wi-Fi. A lot of tablets don't have a dedicated data plan. The vast majority of tablets are Wi-Fi usage, but most people, they don't necessarily walk around with their tablet. So, it is a somewhat intermittent connection, but not as much as the phone. And then the variation, especially for Android, the tablet variations are pretty mind-boggling. There's some sites out there if you search that let you, plug in all these variables, and there are literally hundreds of different Android tablets that have different, screen resolution, screen orientation. It gets complicated pretty quickly. And then big screen TV. So these smart TVs, I think a couple of people talked about that. I have one at home, and they're not very powerful. They don't have a lot of memory or processing power. They have a little remote control, which is kind of like using the old Motorola Razr rocker control for navigating. And they are generally connected most of the time. I in my house have a little bit of intermittent connectivity because it's Wi-Fi. But for the most part, they're connected. They often have quality speakers. People hook them up to their home speakers, so they tend to be communal. People don't tend to listen to it with headphones. And part of the trick of this is optimize not only the rocker controls but distance viewing. So I think it was Ted Woodbury had a little chart that showed that by the time you actually sit 10 feet away from these and you do the math, you actually are getting almost less information than you are on a tablet. So even though they're big, you can't fit that much content because things have to be big. And the controls are tricky. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. We did a TV-oriented app with the rocker controls. I have to give a little shout out to Adam from Blink, who helped us with some interaction design. It's a tricky problem to solve, how you get up and down, especially for us. We have a pretty deep content hierarchy. We're at 15 million songs. We have 4 levels of genre hierarchy. So browsing up and down is kind of tricky on a remote control. So we have this idea of kind of opening and closing the player on the right, and then navigating through kind of panels of content. And everything has to be, visible at 10 feet away. So fonts have to be pretty big, pictures need to be big, things need to be graphical. In this case, we went very dark because the content is really the hero in this case. You're typically watching in your living room. And then the other tricky thing about TVs is they're all different. They are HTML based, but Samsung, Shark, Panasonic, and Vizio all have different standards, different submission processes, approval processes. So while the main interaction works the same, the layout space is not always the same, and they have certain controls they require that they put in the margins that take up a certain amount of space. So safety zones, they call them. So it's complicated to do something that is simple, a simple interaction across multiple TVs. So Xbox is another one. We just launched that last fall. Again, that's very specific to the Metro design conventions. Microsoft's very prescriptive in how you need to design. The platform itself is very game and movie focused. So it's kind of a shared interface. It's not a solo interface. It's complicated, additionally complicated by the fact that you have voice control and motion control. So you have the Kinect, so you can activate the Kinect and use your hand to navigate, and you can use voice controls. That puts a lot of constraints on how many buttons you can have on the screen, kind of how you use voice. It's pretty much always connected. You're hardwired typically into your Ethernet. Communal, I mentioned that. So, for Xbox, it's also very much like Windows Phone. It's kind of this pivot metaphor. Everything's a pivot, so you kind of go back and forth until you go in, and when you go deeper, then you pivot back and forth. It's really challenging for something like our service where we do have deep content. It's not really optimized for browsing deeply up and down a tree. It's really optimized for shallow kind of viewing of, a catalog of movies or catalog of games. We had some real challenges with trying to make this work for our the depth and breadth of our catalog. And it's very visually oriented. Again, some of the same rules of 10-foot apply. It's relatively big. You're fairly far away. Things need to be large, and you can't think. There's nothing. Everything's horizontal. There's nothing vertical, which is kind of interesting. Everything has to kind of go in this panorama. So even lists of tracks on an album are a big scrolling list. So the last one, hopefully I'm okay on time, is desktop and laptop. So we also have an old PC client that we're in the process of redesigning, and we have a web version that runs. So this really does have maximum control. You have full keyboard, mouse control. We find people are always connected for these sessions, and the sessions are much longer. People really use these at work all day long. People listen for hours and hours a day at work. So the sessions are longer. And work is really the main place that people use these. Some people at home. Some people actually have, longtime Rhapsody users have the PC client on a computer at home. But and then, multiple activities. You're not just listening to music. It's a work computer, so you're doing your email, you're writing your presentation, whatever it is you do for your work. You're switching back and forth, so you're kind of multitasking. And again, it's solo. Most people listen with headphones through this this interface. So, some of the tenets that we've worked on. We have a lot of constraints, but uniform information architecture. So we've come up with a naming of how we group and call content navigation across the board. So when you go to any product, you have the same thing located behind the same door. So at least people know if they go to something called browse, they know what to expect. Or if they go to something called radio, they know what to expect. We have visual consistency for the most part. We've made some choices to make them look a little bit different. The Xbox is a little more colorful. It's got the big background with all the artist names, kind of graffiti names behind it, because it's a little more of a gaming device. The TV is darker because it's kind of a living room oriented one. We wanted to make it hero. But for the most part, we were developing a language, a visual language, a consistent language of how you style things and what kind of content you present. What do you present for an album or track? You know, is it the artist name and the label, or you know, what is it what is the content that people want to see for each type of information in the hierarchy: song, playlist, album, artist. And then device optimized UI to the extent that we can, try to take advantage of the more capable input methods and figure out clever ways to get around things like the TV rocker control. And then context-specific features. So we don't put everything on every device. So the Xbox was an example of a much more limited set of functionality. We really tried to focus on the things that people want to do in a more lean-back experience rather than trying to put everything in there. Just give you an idea. And then these are just some principles. So the idea of figuring out what's the most common thing that somebody wants to do and putting it front and center so that, you know, not everything has this, not every device has the same exact hierarchy. Things are called the same, but I may put something underneath something else on one platform versus another, depending on what's the most common activity. And, you know, simple things like, you know, make primary actions primary. These are just good UX principles in general. Right experience in the right context. I've talked about that a bit. And then really, you know, this is the big problem we're always trying to solve is effortless access to the music I want to listen to. So to the extent that we can be really smart with recommendations and other ways of figuring out what people want to listen to at that moment, we've just made it easier. We don't want to make people work. On the other hand, the value of something like Rhapsody is people pay $10 a month because they want to be able to listen to exactly what they want to listen to. So it's kind of this trade-off we have between control and, you know, read my mind and bring me music I want to listen to. It's kind of a dichotomy. So these are kind of our tensions that we deal with. How many features do I put in? What do I take out for context? Is it shared or social? Is it personal or private? And, you know, some of our tactical challenges, we have a lot of different legacy products. So I showed you kind of the products that I've been working on since I've been at Rhapsody, but we run on a whole bunch of old TVs and all kinds of funny little internet devices. There's a little kind of library in our building, and you can see all these CE connected devices. One that I didn't mention was Sonos. That's another one that we run on that we haven't really touched. My team hasn't touched. We have this, one of our organizational challenges is this idea of features everywhere. Well, you know, we have this feature, we should put it everywhere. We've invested in it, our platform supports it. We should light up everything on every platform. So that's a struggle for us as a design team to kind of educate people that not every context requires every feature. You can get kind of overwhelming to try to do everything, say, on a Sonos device or a TV. Just release timing, we've got 8 different Scrum teams releasing in different cycles, so we don't necessarily have the luxury of kind of making everything release at the same time, so there's kind of technical challenges there. And then platform constraints, I've talked a little bit about that. We've got you know, anything from a TV to a tablet, so all different sorts of constraints. And then we did some, I mentioned we did some ethnographic research, and then we had an offsite as a team, and we came up with kind of our tenets of what we'd like to strive for a cross-platform music experience. You know, and this notion of kind of giving people access to music everywhere, letting them find what they want when they want it, letting the service bring me new music, keep the music playing. That's something we talk about a lot. Try to find a way to make it easy to keep music playing all the time. Some of these are more technical, like instant uninterrupted playback. Songs should load right away. They shouldn't stop in the middle. Just technical things. Controlled social sharing, we're still working on a social sharing strategy, but how do you let people share music without, in a way that's controlled, where they can decide what people can see. Trust the service, know the service, love the service, so I get just the features I need in the context that I want, no more and no less. So I'm not getting more than I want, not getting less than I want, just the right amount. And that's it.